There is a force that silently destroys more dreams than failure ever could, and it rarely shows up as something dramatic or obvious. It shows up as delay. As, "I'll start tomorrow." As, "I still have time." As, "just one more break." It sounds harmless in the moment, almost reasonable, but this quiet habit becomes the reason so many people never reach the life they imagine for themselves. Because while nothing seems to be happening, something very real is being lost: time, opportunities, and the confidence that comes from action. Laziness is not always about staying in bed all day or doing nothing at all. Most of the time, it is far more subtle. It looks like postponing important work. It looks like waiting for motivation to appear. It looks like convincing yourself that the right moment will come later. But life does not pause for preparation. While you are waiting for the perfect timing, life continues to move forward without you. The real tragedy is not that people lack the ability to succeed. The deeper issue is that many people never give themselves a real chance to succeed. They delay starting. They overthink instead of acting. They keep pushing life's important decisions into an imaginary future where everything will somehow be easier. But that future never arrives in the way they expect, and in the meantime, years quietly pass. Success has never been random or mysterious. It is not built on luck or sudden inspiration. At its core, success is the result of simple discipline repeated consistently over time. The difference between people who achieve their goals and those who don't is not talent alone. It is action. Laziness is not the absence of ability. It is the absence of disciplined execution. You can have intelligence, creativity, and potential, but without action, they remain unused, like tools never taken out of a box. One important truth is often ignored: the world does not reward intention. It rewards execution. No one is recognized for what they plan to do someday. People are valued for what they actually did. Every result you admire in others is connected to actions they took when it was inconvenient, uncomfortable, or difficult. That is where real progress begins. If you look closely at the people you respect, you will notice something important. They were not born with a permanent state of motivation or discipline. They made a decision. A decision to act even when they didn't feel like it. A decision to keep going when progress was slow. A decision to show up repeatedly, regardless of mood or circumstances. They understood a simple reality: feelings are temporary, but discipline creates long-term results. The people who succeed are not those who always feel ready. They are the ones who act regardless of readiness. When the alarm goes off, they get up. When work feels difficult, they continue anyway. When results are not immediate, they stay consistent. This is how ordinary individuals slowly transform into people who stand out, not through one big moment, but through repeated small decisions that build momentum over time. Laziness often hides behind harmless thoughts. "I'll start next week." "I need more time." "Tomorrow will be better." These thoughts seem small, but they carry a heavy consequence. Because tomorrow has a way of turning into next week, and next week quietly turns into next month. Without noticing, time stretches into years, and the gap between who you are and who you wanted to become quietly grows wider. Success, at its core, is nothing more than a few simple actions practiced daily. The important word is daily. Because success does not come from occasional effort. It comes from consistency. Every small productive decision adds to your future. Every small delay subtracts from it. Imagine building a house. You do not construct it in a single day. You place one brick at a time. Some days you lay many bricks, other days only a few. Progress may feel slow, but consistency ensures completion. Your life works in the same way. Every disciplined action is like placing another brick in the structure of your future. The key is repetition. One action alone does not define your life, but repeated actions shape your identity. That is why discipline becomes easier over time. At first, it feels forced and uncomfortable. But as you continue, it starts to feel natural. Eventually, it becomes part of who you are, not something you struggle to maintain. Growth requires discomfort. That is a truth many people try to avoid. Anything meaningful will challenge your comfort zone. Waking up early, working on difficult tasks, staying consistent when results are not visible, these things are not always easy. But they are necessary. Comfort may feel safe, but it does not produce progress. Mistakes and setbacks are part of this process. There will be days when you fail to follow your routine, when motivation disappears, or when distractions win. These moments do not define you. What matters is your response afterward. Staying down creates a pattern of failure. Getting back up creates a pattern of resilience. Every disciplined action sends a message to your mind. I am someone who follows through. Every excuse sends a different message. I can be ignored. Over time, these messages shape how you see yourself and how you behave in future situations. That is why discipline and identity are closely connected. Successful people are not those who never struggle. They are those who continue despite struggle. They show up repeatedly, even when conditions are not ideal. This consistency creates trust, not only from others but from themselves. And that trust opens doors to opportunities that inconsistent behavior never could. Opportunities tend to align with reliability. People trust those who are consistent. They rely on those who deliver. And that reliability is built through disciplined behavior over time. It is not created overnight, but it becomes visible through patterns of action. One productive day may seem small, but it carries hidden power. It creates momentum. A productive day leads to another, and then another. Over time, these days accumulate into weeks, months, and eventually years of progress. That is how success is quietly built, without sudden transformation, but through steady repetition. The mistake many people make is waiting for a perfect moment to begin. But perfection never arrives. There will always be distractions, delays, and uncertainties. Waiting only postpones progress. The only real starting point is today, with whatever time and energy you currently have. Discipline does not require a perfect situation. It requires a decision. A decision to begin despite imperfection. Once that decision is made, everything else starts to shift. Not instantly, but gradually, as actions begin to replace hesitation. Each step forward creates clarity. Each completed task builds confidence. Each moment of effort strengthens direction. This is how transformation happens, not in a single moment, but through continuous movement forward. And as you continue building this pattern, something important changes. Discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like identity. You no longer think of yourself as someone trying to be disciplined. You begin to see yourself as someone who simply acts. That shift is powerful, because identity is what drives long-term behavior. Once discipline becomes part of who you are, laziness loses its influence. It may still appear, but it no longer controls your decisions. This is the foundation of real progress, not occasional effort, but consistent identity-based action. And once that foundation is built, everything else becomes possible. Once discipline begins to shape your identity, something important starts to change in the way you respond to everyday situations. Tasks that once felt heavy no longer carry the same weight, not because they became easier, but because your mindset has shifted. You stop negotiating with yourself every time something needs to be done, and instead you start acting with less internal resistance. This shift is not loud or dramatic. It happens quietly through repetition. You wake up on time a few more days in a row. You complete tasks you previously delayed. You respond to responsibility instead of avoiding it. Slowly, your actions begin to match the person you want to become, and that alignment creates stability in your behavior. But even at this stage, laziness does not disappear completely. It still exists, and it still tries to influence decisions. The difference is that it loses authority. It no longer decides your direction. Instead, it becomes something you notice and move past. You recognize it as a signal to act, not a reason to stop. One of the most important truths in personal development is that momentum matters more than intensity. Many people try to change their lives through sudden bursts of motivation. They work extremely hard for a short time, then burn out and return to old patterns. Real progress does not come from intensity alone, it comes from consistency that continues even when motivation fades. Momentum begins with small actions. A short walk instead of no movement at all. A few minutes of focused work instead of waiting for perfect concentration. One completed task instead of a long list of unfinished intentions. These small actions may not seem powerful at first, but they create a chain reaction that changes your overall direction. Think of momentum like a moving object. Starting is always the hardest part because everything is still. But once something starts moving, it becomes easier to keep it in motion than to restart from zero. Your habits work in the same way. The first step requires effort, but every step after that becomes smoother. Laziness understands this principle as well, which is why it tries so hard to interrupt the beginning of action. It does not always stop you with force. Instead, it delays you with thoughts. It tells you that you should wait until later, that you are not ready yet, that you need more preparation. These thoughts create distance between intention and action. Overthinking is one of the most common forms of hidden laziness. It feels productive because you are thinking, planning, and analyzing. But without execution, thinking becomes a loop that produces no real progress. Ideas only gain value when they are applied. Otherwise, they remain unfinished potential. At some point, every person must confront the gap between knowing and doing. Many people know exactly what they need to do to improve their lives. They know the habits, the routines, the actions required. The challenge is not knowledge. The challenge is execution, and execution always requires discipline over comfort. Comfort has a strong influence on human behavior. It encourages you to stay where things feel easy and familiar. There is nothing wrong with comfort itself, but when it becomes a priority over growth, it creates stagnation. Growth requires movement beyond what feels convenient. It requires stepping into situations where effort is necessary. Every meaningful achievement in life is connected to discomfort in some form. Learning a new skill, building a career, improving health, or achieving financial stability all require effort that initially feels difficult. But that discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of development. People often misinterpret difficulty as a reason to stop. In reality, difficulty is usually a sign that you are moving in the right direction. If everything always feels easy, it usually means you are not challenging yourself enough to grow. Progress exists outside of comfort, not inside it. Another important factor is consistency in small decisions. Life is not shaped by one major choice alone. It is shaped by hundreds of small decisions made daily. What you choose to do with your time, how you respond to distraction, and whether you follow through on simple tasks all contribute to your long-term direction. A single decision may seem insignificant, but repetition gives it power. One skipped task does not change your life immediately. But repeated skipping creates a pattern. One disciplined action also seems small, but repeated daily, it becomes transformation. The difference is not in size, but in consistency. This is why discipline is often described as a quiet force. It does not rely on emotional highs or external pressure. It works steadily in the background, shaping outcomes over time. You may not notice the effects immediately, but eventually the results become impossible to ignore. There is also an internal cost to ignoring discipline. Every time you avoid a responsibility, you weaken trust in yourself. You begin to doubt your ability to follow through. This self-doubt can grow silently, affecting your confidence in other areas of life. What starts as small avoidance can eventually influence your entire mindset. On the other hand, every time you complete something you said you would do, you strengthen self-trust. You build a reliable internal foundation that supports future action. This is why disciplined people often appear more confident. Their confidence is not based on appearance or words, but on evidence from their own behavior. At this stage of growth, something important begins to happen. You start realizing that your future is not determined by sudden change, but by repeated action. You stop looking for shortcuts or quick transformations. That shift changes everything. Because once you stop waiting for ideal conditions, you start working with reality. And reality is where progress actually happens. Not in plans, not in intentions, but in execution. Each day becomes an opportunity to either move forward or remain still. There is no neutral position. Even standing still is a form of direction because life continues to move regardless of your choice. Time does not pause, and opportunities do not wait. This is why discipline becomes so important. It ensures that your actions remain aligned with your goals even when motivation disappears. It removes dependence on feelings and replaces it with structure. And that structure creates long-term stability in your progress. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see your life differently. You realize that change is not something external that happens to you. It is something internal that you create through repeated behavior. And once you accept that responsibility, you gain control over direction. That is the real turning point, when you stop seeing discipline as an effort and start seeing it as the foundation of your identity. From that point forward, every action becomes a reflection of who you are becoming, not just what you are trying to achieve. When discipline becomes part of your identity, your relationship with effort begins to change in a deeper way. Tasks no longer feel like constant battles between motivation and resistance. Instead, they become part of a natural rhythm. You stop asking yourself whether you feel like doing something and start focusing on whether it needs to be done. That simple shift removes a huge amount of internal conflict. At this stage, action becomes more automatic. You still experience distractions and moments of hesitation, but they no longer control your behavior. You recognize them quickly and move past them. This is not because laziness disappears, but because your response to it becomes faster and more decisive. The delay between intention and action becomes smaller. One of the most important changes at this level is how you perceive time. Earlier, time may have felt flexible, as if there was always more of it available later. But with discipline, you begin to understand that time is not something that waits. It moves constantly, whether you are using it wisely or wasting it. This awareness creates a sense of urgency, not panic, but clarity. Many people underestimate how much their future is shaped by ordinary days. They expect transformation to come from rare, powerful moments. But in reality, life is built from repetition. The way you spend a normal day is the strongest indicator of the life you will have in the future. Discipline turns ordinary days into building blocks instead of wasted time. At this point, excuses lose much of their power. You begin to see them more clearly for what they are, temporary justifications that protect comfort in the present but damage progress in the long run. The more disciplined you become, the less convincing these excuses feel. You no longer negotiate with them as often because you have already seen their cost. There is also a noticeable change in how you approach difficult tasks. Earlier, difficulty may have been a signal to delay or avoid action. Now, difficulty becomes part of the process. You understand that anything meaningful will require effort, and resistance is not a warning sign, but a normal stage of growth. This understanding reduces hesitation. Consistency becomes your strongest tool. Instead of relying on occasional bursts of productivity, you begin to trust steady, repeated effort. Even when results are not immediate, you continue working. This is where most people separate themselves from long-term success, not in talent, but in persistence during slow progress. One of the most powerful realizations at this stage is that your environment does not control you as much as your habits do. While external factors can influence your mood or focus, your consistent behavior determines your direction. This means that even in imperfect conditions, you can still move forward if your habits are strong enough. As discipline deepens, you also begin to notice how much mental energy was previously spent on avoidance. When you delay tasks, you are not just delaying work, you are also carrying mental weight in the form of stress, reminders, and unfinished responsibility. Action reduces this burden. Completing tasks frees mental space and brings clarity. Another important shift happens in your standards. You stop accepting minimum effort as normal. You begin to expect more from yourself, not out of pressure, but out of respect for your goals. This internal standard gradually replaces external motivation. You no longer need reminders from others because your expectations come from within. Over time, discipline also changes how you view failure. Instead of seeing mistakes as signs to stop, you begin to see them as feedback. A missed day or an unproductive moment does not define your identity. What matters is your ability to return to action afterward. Recovery becomes more important than perfection. This mindset reduces fear. Many people avoid action because they fear failure or imperfection. But when discipline is strong, failure loses its emotional weight. It becomes part of the process rather than something to avoid at all costs. This shift allows you to take more consistent action without being paralyzed by outcomes. At this level, your identity continues to evolve. You no longer describe yourself as someone trying to be disciplined. Instead, discipline becomes your default behavior. It is no longer a forced decision but a natural response. You act because that is simply what you do. This transformation does not happen instantly. It is built slowly through repeated choices. Each time you choose action over delay, you strengthen this identity. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the direction you are building. Over time, these small decisions create a stable foundation for long-term success. One of the most powerful effects of this change is trust in yourself. When you consistently act according to your intentions, you begin to rely on your own judgment more confidently. You no longer question whether you will complete tasks because your history provides evidence that you will. This self-trust becomes a major source of confidence. With this confidence comes freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from internal conflict. You are no longer constantly debating whether to act or delay. The decision becomes simpler, and action becomes faster. This reduces stress and increases clarity in everyday life. As discipline strengthens, you also begin to influence your surroundings differently. People notice consistency. They rely on those who show up regularly and deliver results. Without forcing attention, disciplined behavior naturally builds respect and credibility. Opportunities often follow those patterns of reliability. At this point, progress is no longer about forcing yourself forward. It becomes about maintaining a system that already works. Instead of struggling to start, your focus shifts to continuing. Instead of fighting resistance, you focus on refining your habits. Growth becomes a steady process rather than a constant struggle, and slowly, without dramatic moments, your life begins to reflect the choices you made repeatedly when no one was watching. Not because of luck or sudden change, but because discipline quietly shaped your direction over time. As discipline becomes your natural way of living, something deeper begins to change inside you. You stop viewing success as a distant destination and start seeing it as a result of daily behavior. The idea of waiting for a perfect moment disappears because you realize that the perfect moment is simply the moment you decide to act. Nothing external needs to change first. The shift begins within you. At this stage, laziness no longer has the same influence it once did. It may still appear in the form of thoughts or suggestions, but it no longer directs your choices. You recognize it quickly as a temporary urge for comfort rather than a valid direction for your life. Instead of negotiating with it, you move past it and return to action. This is how control is gradually reclaimed. One of the most powerful realizations is that success is not built in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary repetition. The quiet decisions you make every day shape everything. Waking up on time, focusing when it is easier to distract yourself, continuing when results are slow, and finishing what you start. These simple actions form the foundation of long-term achievement. Many people misunderstand success because they only see the outcome, not the process. They see results, recognition, or achievement, but they do not see the thousands of small disciplined choices behind it. What appears as sudden success is actually the result of consistent behavior practiced over time when no one was watching. As you continue to grow in discipline, your mindset shifts from emotional reactions to intentional actions. You no longer depend on feeling ready. You no longer wait for motivation to push you forward. Instead, you act based on direction and purpose. This creates stability because your progress is no longer dependent on changing emotions. There is also a quiet but powerful transformation in how you view responsibility. Instead of seeing it as a burden, you begin to see it as ownership. You take responsibility for your time, your habits, and your future. This ownership mindset removes excuses because you understand that every outcome is connected to your actions. At this point, discipline is no longer something you practice occasionally. It becomes the default structure of your life. You do not need constant reminders or external pressure. You simply act because that is who you have become. And that identity becomes stronger with every repetition. Failures and setbacks still happen, but their meaning changes completely. Instead of stopping your progress, they become part of your development. A missed opportunity or an unproductive day no longer defines your direction. What defines you is your ability to return, adjust, and continue moving forward without losing momentum. Over time, you begin to notice that your confidence is no longer based on hope or desire, but on evidence. You trust yourself because you have consistently proven that you can follow through. This self-trust becomes one of the most valuable outcomes of discipline because it influences every area of your life. Your environment may still contain distractions, challenges, and uncertainty, but your internal structure remains stable. You are no longer easily pulled away by external noise because your habits guide your behavior more than your emotions do. This creates clarity even in difficult situations. One of the most important truths you come to understand is that discipline does not remove difficulty from life. Instead, it changes your ability to handle it. Challenges still exist, but your response to them becomes stronger, calmer, and more consistent. This is where real growth is measured, not in the absence of problems, but in your ability to respond effectively. As this mindset becomes permanent, your life starts to reflect the accumulation of your choices. Opportunities appear not by chance, but by consistency. Progress becomes visible not because of sudden change, but because of sustained effort. What once felt distant begins to feel natural because you have built the habits that support it. In the end, the message is simple but powerful. Laziness loses when action begins. Excuses lose when discipline takes over. And doubt loses when consistency becomes your identity. Nothing changes overnight, but everything changes through repetition. You do not need a perfect version of yourself to begin. You only need a committed version. Because every disciplined action adds direction to your future, and every excuse removes it. The life you want is not waiting for a future moment. It is being shaped by what you choose to do right now. So the real question is no longer about ability or opportunity. It is about decision. Will you continue to delay, or will you finally begin building the habits that create the life you say you want? Because every day you act brings you closer, and every day you delay quietly moves it further away. Your future is not created in imagination. It is created in action, and that action begins today, with the choices you make when no one is watching, when nothing is guaranteed, and when only discipline decides the outcome. At first, the difference feels invisible, but over time, it becomes the gap between regret and achievement. Laziness does not usually act aggressively. It is patient. It whispers instead of shouting. It encourages comfort instead of effort. It tells you that resting a little longer will not matter. But while you listen to those quiet excuses, opportunities continue to move forward without waiting. Life does not slow down because you are unprepared. What many people fail to realize is that dreams do not disappear suddenly. They fade slowly, not because someone stops believing in them, but because they stop acting on them. A dream without action becomes only a thought. And thoughts without effort slowly lose their power until they are no longer part of reality, just memory. The beginning of any meaningful task is always the hardest part. Starting requires effort because it breaks inertia. But once action begins, something important happens. Momentum starts to build. And once momentum exists, everything becomes easier to continue. Laziness knows this, which is why it focuses its resistance at the starting point, before movement even begins. Think about nature for a moment. A farmer cannot wait for the harvest season to think about planting seeds. Everything depends on early, consistent effort done long before results are visible. If planting is delayed, harvest never comes. Life follows the same principle. What you do today determines what you receive tomorrow. Effort compounds. So does neglect. Most people say they want success, but desire alone is not enough. Real progress requires discipline, consistency, and sacrifice. And that is where many stop. Not because success is impossible, but because the process demands effort they are not willing to sustain. The true difference between intention and achievement is action repeated over time. At this point, a difficult but necessary question arises. What has procrastination already taken from you? A skill you never developed, an idea you never executed, a goal you never started. These losses are not always visible to others, but they shape your future in powerful ways. Because every delayed action carries a hidden cost that accumulates quietly over time, laziness does not only waste time, it slowly reshapes how you see yourself. Every time you make a promise to yourself and fail to follow through, something subtle happens inside your mind. You begin to trust your words less. You start doubting your own commitment. Over time, this weakens confidence, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady decline that many people don't even notice until it becomes part of their identity. On the other hand, discipline builds the opposite effect. Every small promise you keep strengthens your belief in yourself. Every task you complete reinforces trust in your own actions. Confidence is not something that appears suddenly. It is constructed through repeated proof that you can rely on yourself. That is why disciplined people carry a certain quiet strength. They have evidence from their own life that they follow through. Discipline is often misunderstood as pressure or restriction, but in reality, it is a form of self-respect. It is the decision to treat your future seriously enough to act today. When you choose discipline, you are saying that your goals are not just ideas, but commitments. You are proving that your time and energy have direction. Without discipline, even the clearest goals remain distant concepts instead of real achievements. Think of discipline as a bridge between where you are and where you want to be. On one side, there are your dreams, ambitions, and plans. On the other side, there is the life you want to live. Without a bridge, both sides remain separated forever. Discipline is what connects intention to reality. Every action you take builds that bridge one step at a time. The people who achieve consistent success understand something very simple. They do not rely on motivation. Motivation is unstable. It comes and goes depending on mood, environment, or energy levels. If you depend on motivation, your progress will always be unpredictable. Some days you will move forward, and other days you will stop completely. Discipline works differently. It does not depend on feelings. It asks a simple question: what needs to be done right now? And then it responds with action, regardless of comfort or emotion. That is why disciplined people continue even on days when they feel tired, distracted, or unmotivated. They do not wait for the perfect mental state. They act anyway. If you observe daily life closely, you will see that success is not built on rare or extraordinary actions. It is built on small, repeated choices. Choosing to wake up when you could sleep longer. Choosing to read when you could scroll. choosing to work when you could delay. These choices may seem insignificant in isolation, but over time they create massive differences in outcomes. Every day, there is an internal conversation happening within you. One part of you looks for comfort, asking to delay effort and take the easier path. Another part pushes for growth, encouraging discipline and responsibility. The direction of your life depends on which voice you choose to follow more often. Over time, the voice you obey becomes stronger. This is why discipline is not punishment. It is a form of self-leadership. It is how you guide yourself toward a better version of your life. Each time you act despite resistance, you reinforce control over your habits and your direction. Each time you give in to excuses, you weaken that control slightly. The process is gradual, but powerful. Imagine building a house. You do not construct it in a single day. You place one brick at a time. Some days you lay many bricks, other days only a few. Progress may feel slow, but consistency ensures completion. Your life works in the same way. Every disciplined action is like placing another brick in the structure of your future. The key is repetition. One action alone does not define your life, but repeated actions shape your identity. That is why discipline becomes easier over time. At first, it feels forced and uncomfortable. But as you continue, it starts to feel natural. Eventually, it becomes part of who you are, not something you struggle to maintain. Growth requires discomfort. That is a truth many people try to avoid. Anything meaningful will challenge your comfort zone. Waking up early, working on difficult tasks, staying consistent when results are not visible, these things are not always easy. But they are necessary. Comfort may feel safe, but it does not produce progress. Mistakes and setbacks are part of this process. There will be days when you fail to follow your routine, when motivation disappears, or when distractions win. These moments do not define you. What matters is your response afterward. Staying down creates a pattern of failure. Getting back up creates a pattern of resilience. Every disciplined action sends a message to your mind: I am someone who follows through. Every excuse sends a different message: I can be ignored. Over time, these messages shape how you see yourself and how you behave in future situations. That is why discipline and identity are closely connected. Successful people are not those who never struggle. They are those who continue despite struggle. They show up repeatedly, even when conditions are not ideal. This consistency creates trust, not only from others but from themselves. And that trust opens doors to opportunities that inconsistent behavior never could.